if you had to pick 3 guys from this tier that could move up to tier A and 1 guy that could move down to tier C, who would those 4 players overall be?
The 3 players that could move up, in my opinion, are Brock Purdy, CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray.
Okay.
And the one that can move down, unfortunately, is Drake Maye.
Really?
Just because from a weapon standpoint, he's got nobody, right? If you fail on another offensive coordinator for him, maybe the best way to say it is this: the floor on Drake Maye is the lowest of any of the quarterbacks in this B tier, but his ceiling is still up there. That's what keeps him in the B tier. But if things don't go right again this year for Drake Maye, he will likely find himself in the C tier next year.
Interesting. So my 3 that I really like to move up: Kyler, Caleb, Bo are the 3 that I think can move up. And then the guy I think can move down is Jared Goff, if any, just because of the changes, the fact that he is a pocket passer. It is officially Dynasty time. The offseason has hit for fantasy football, but for Dynasty fantasy football, the offseason never comes because it never sleeps. We are always on. We're always talking rookies. We're always making trades. That's why we love it, because it really, truly never ends. If anything, it just starts right after the season ends again. We're going to rank our top 24 quarterbacks into tiers. We got 4 tiers here for you today. And Ty, just me and you. We don't have our fearless leader, Lucas. He's on vacation in Costa Rica, catching 200-pound fish, flexing on us while we're just bearing the cold up here. I mean, it's brutal in Minnesota.
It is brutal. I mean, wind chill of like -30, and that's not true at all. It's just in the teens. But again, Big Tuna himself is going out and just having the time of his life. And we're here just, keeping the lights on.
Exactly. We're recording this Tuesday morning because our Vikings had a disappointing Sunday night loss, and we needed a day on Monday to grieve. So you will be getting this
still grieving, but
yeah, well,
not grieving as much as yesterday.
We're always grieving as Vikings fans, but we will jump right on in with our S tier: Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jayden Daniels, and Jalen Hurts. And Ty, I want to start with Jayden Daniels because he's the newest addition to this S tier. I think we were coming into the year as, what is he going to look like? Is he the next? We knew he had the type of upside with the rushing, the passing, 51 passing touchdowns at LSU, but we didn't know for sure like how it was going to translate. And it looked pretty good. So why don't you give the justification for the people of why Jayden Daniels belongs in the S tier?
He belongs in the S tier because the training wheels were taking off of the offense. That was the big concern for Jayden Daniels going into the season, right? During the preseason, everything was dink and dump. It was not pushing the ball downfield at all. And you're like, boy, well, if you're not going to throw the ball downfield, you're only banking on his rushing production, which sure enough, that came through in the year. He finished second in rushing yards among quarterbacks this year. But when Cliff Kingsbury took the training wheels off of the offense and he let Jayden throw the ball downfield, that's when the offense started to flourish. That's where we got Terry McLaurin to have kind of his, I don't want to call it his breakout year, but I'll just say his best year yet, right? That's the hope moving forward, is that there is no restraints on Jayden Daniels moving forward. There's no reason to have any restraints on it because he proved that he is capable of handling that kind of responsibility in his offense. And again, with Dynasty, we need to look into the future a bit. This offense is only going to get better, right? Terry, yes, he's getting older, but this offense is going to invest in some weapons for him because you can't just bank, again, on an aging Terry McLaurin, on an aging Zach Ertz, and then have a rotating door of Olamide Zaccheaus and Jameson Crowder and De'Ami Brown and those kind of guys. So Jayden Daniels, young, talented, with the offense that's going to just will only continue to get better.
Yeah, this season, 3,500 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, 9 picks, and like you said, just shy of 900 rushing yards and another 6 touchdowns. When we talk about that rushing upside, and that's what you notice about this S tier is all 4 of these guys have rushing upside. That's what makes them great. That's why they're able to all have averaged over 21 fantasy points a game this season. is because they're all rushing for 500 plus yards. Daniels pushing 900, Lamar over 900, and then Hurts and Allen scoring a crazy amount of touchdowns. But yeah, I agree. 24 years old and already putting up, I think, 21.5 fantasy points per game. That's a pretty good, baseline of what we have to come. And like you said, it's not like he had crazy weapons where he could just kind of lob the ball up and anything would happen. He had Terry, and that was really it. I mean, Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler dealing with injuries this season. So you got to like what you see from him. The other three are kind of staples that we've seen in the S tier. Lamar was, can he stay healthy? Well, he's been healthy the last 2 years in the MVP talks. If you're starting a super flex dynasty league, what order are you taking these three to start off that league?
Great question. I would probably go Josh Allen, then Lamar, then Jalen Hurts. I think, honestly, it's a coin flip between Lamar and Josh Allen. My preference would be Allen over Lamar because I think Lamar, for as good as he's been the last 2 years, Josh Allen has been doing it for a much longer period of time. Each of the last 5 seasons, he's finished as the QB1 overall or the QB2, right? Yeah. So Lamar, QB1 this year, was the QB4 last year, won the MVP. Not that I doubt Lamar Jackson in the slightest. I've just seen Josh Allen do it before, and I would expect him to continue to do so.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think, for me, it's Josh Allen, and then it's between Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson. I think just Hurts being able to get 12 to 14 rushing touchdowns a season is just silly. It is absolutely ridiculous. And we've said each year, okay, well, what if they take away the tush push? They didn't. Okay, what about Jalen or Jason Kelce retiring? It didn't matter, right? What about Saquon Barkley coming in, being the offensive player of the year? It doesn't matter. Jalen Hurts is still going to get a crazy amount of rushing touchdowns. But yeah, I think I agree. I think I go Allen, Lamar, Hurts. I actually think I might personally, and I think you're on the same page, might actually put Jayden Daniels ahead of Hurts. Would you agree with that, or are you still Hurts then Daniels?
See, that's a great question because I see Jalen Hurts closer to a Josh Allen than I do to a Lamar. I see Jayden Daniels closer to a Lamar than a Josh Allen, right? Okay. Where Lamar and Jayden Daniels will be able to put up points through the air. Their rushing production is in the yards. They're not going to score a ton on the ground versus Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen. They are going to be scoring on the ground, right? So, and I think the other difference is too, Lamar and Jayden Daniels are rushing for 300, 400 more yards than Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, right? Mm-hmm. But Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen are scoring 7, 8 more rushing touchdowns than them, right? So there's a slight advantage to rushing touchdowns over the rushing yards, right? By that kind of, when the discrepancy is that big. But I don't, is it fair to say that I don't really care? That I think any one of these four, it doesn't matter if they're going to score, they're going to rush for fantasy points.
I would agree. And that's the thing with Josh Allen. Like, I understand the MVP talks between Lamar and Josh Allen. Real quick, just 10 seconds, because I know the people want to know. Who's your MVP this year, Tyler? Are you a Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen guy?
I'm a Lamar. I'm Lamar. Not only has he shown, like, the eye test has proven to me that he's a true, like, wizard in the pocket now this year, but his numbers compared to his MVP year last year are better. He's thrown for almost 500 more passing yards, has nearly 20 more passing touchdowns, has less interceptions, and has nearly 100 more rushing yards. Yeah. To me, Josh Allen has had a great year, but I think recency bias is carrying that a bit with 2 performances where he's putting up over 40 fantasy points.
Yeah. I understand the voter fatigue because I do think Josh Allen should win one. It's been a special season, but I agree. I think Lamar Jackson has just been so unbelievable. But from a fantasy perspective, the reason we have Josh Allen first is since 2020, he has not had a season where he's averaged less than 24 fantasy points a game. 24. Patrick Mahomes at 18.3 this season, just to put that in perspective. He's averaging 6 more points per game than Patrick Mahomes. Just unreal. Speaking of Mahomes, let's move on to that next tier, our A tier. And actually, quickly before we talk about it, let's just tell the people on YouTube, we're going to be here all offseason. We're going to rank our top running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. So make sure you subscribe. Join the fellowship. We want you around. We want you here. We want your input. We want to know where you think we screwed up. We want to know where you think we're right. And we want you to let us know. So drop some comments, subscribe, turn on those notifications, do all that jazz. If you're on the audio podcast, we love you too. Thank you for listening. But in the A tier, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Jordan Love. And we're going to start with Burrow because, Ty, me and you had a little discussion, a little disagreement on how the tier should be split up. You were pushing to put Burrow up in that S tier. I was pretty firm on I want to keep him in the A tier. I made the graphics, so he stayed in the A tier today. But why don't you give the case for why you think Burrow is a little bit closer to that S tier than this A tier?
I mean, it's because I believe in this offense that Cincinnati has. And the fact that you're top 5 in pass DVOA, which just really measures efficiency and takes out kind of the other, I don't want to say like non-important stats, but it really narrows it down to the key metrics, right? Burrow himself threw for nearly 5,000 yards this year and 43 touchdowns. Like, it's no secret that if Cincinnati is in the playoffs and maybe not sitting at around 500, Burrow wins MVP, right? That's the kind of year that he had. So it's really a belief in the offense and the fact that you're throwing to Jamar Chase, right? And I'll transition into the conversation that we really had about Joe Burrow is because what happens to T. Higgins, right? When T. Higgins was out this year and even last year, we saw that this offense kind of dipped a little bit in terms of their production, right? So if T. Higgins leaves, can this Cincinnati offense really be at the level that they were this year, which I will say outright, like, they were producing at an insane clip. There's going to be some regression with this offense. But I think because of my belief that they bring T back, Jamar Chase gets extended. They keep Zach Taylor, which, again, we've passed all the coaching firings and all that stuff. I think Zach Taylor is safe for at least another year. So my belief in Cincinnati is still pretty high, all things considered.
Yeah, I think I have a little bit worried about T leaving. I also think when we look back, right, he's had a couple of great seasons. Quarterback 3 finish this year. Obviously hurt in 2023. We count that as a wash. When we are going to look at, his career as a whole later down the road, we're going to be like, okay, 2023, kind of a wash. 2022 was quarterback 4, threw for 4,400 yards, 35 passing touchdowns, had another 5 rushing touchdowns. What I look at is the 2021 season. 4,600 yards, 34 touchdowns, 14 picks, 2 rushing touchdowns, and 150 yards rushing. That's a good season. That is a very good quarterback season. Yet he finished with 19.5 fantasy points. Still phenomenal. Quarterback 8 finish. But what worries me is for him to have a good year, right? This is, like you said, if the Bengals have a good record, he is smack dab in those MVP talks. He might be winning the MVP race this year, right? If they are in the playoffs, if they're a 10-win team. They weren't, so he's not in those. But if he has just a good year, 35 passing touchdowns, 4,600 yards, he just doesn't compare to the rushing upside of those other quarterbacks. That's my worry, is you have to just have these insane years year after year. Obviously, if you have Jamar and they find a way to bring back T, you can do that, right? That's not out of the realm of possibilities. But that's just the reason for me he's in tier A. And I almost got cute with it and just made a Joe Burrow tier. Because I do think he separated himself a little bit from Mahomes, Herbert, and Love. And the fact that really his floor is kind of that 19 fantasy points per game. Because he's proven, if I'm healthy, I'm throwing 34 touchdowns. I'm throwing 4,500 yards. But the next two, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Jordan Love. And I do want to have this conversation about Mahomes because it's been something that I think people are bringing up more and more. If he didn't have the name recognition of being the best NFL quarterback, would we have already moved him to the B tier, or do you think he still belongs in this A tier?
It's a fair question because, I mean, going into this year, we were very much out on Patrick Mahomes. Like we thought that there would be some bounce back, but the history was telling us like this is not the same Mahomes that we saw in the first, couple of years of his starting career, where he's, QB1, QB2. it did kind of turn around at some point in the middle of the year, right? I really want to say it was kind of week 9 against Tampa Bay. From that point, we saw, I mean, that Tampa Bay game, he had 24.5 points. Then he had a 28 game against Carolina, 23, 26, then towards the end of the year. So we were starting to see the ceiling again. I think, I don't want to say the jury is still out on whether like Mahomes is an A-tier quarterback only being held up by name value, because I think that there's a lot of other pieces that go into this too. The fact that you're in Kansas City with Andy Reid, right? That's a big component of this. You've got a ton of young weapons. Rashee Rice, yes, he got hurt this year, but you've got Xavier Worthy. You know, there's so much else at play other than just name value alone for Mahomes. I think you and I would both say we've got faith in Andy Reid that this offense. Yes, it may, again, we're not going to see the insane ceiling that we saw in this first couple of years as a starter, but he's still going to be a very, very solid and consistent fantasy quarterback for you.
Yeah, you brought up that week 9. Since week 9, he averaged 20 fantasy points a game. And I really don't think it can be understated that you lose Rashee Rice, Marquise Brown, and Isaiah Pacheco all within the first 4 weeks.
Yeah.
That hurts you. You have to retool how you do the offense. The fact he did bounce back, I agree. I think he's still, I mean, obviously he's such a phenomenal quarterback that I think he's going to figure it out. The rushing upside, he's always had a little bit of that. This year was actually his lowest rushing production, but still pretty good. Justin Herbert, very similar. Bounced back over the second half of the year, averaging 19.3 fantasy points per game with just Lad McConkey. Just Lad. I mean, you talk about Josh Palmer. He's making Quentin Johnson look like, I mean, I think Quentin Johnson's going to have people tricked next year, right? Everyone's going to be, oh, we got to be on Quentin Johnson. He's turning it around. He's figured. No, that's just Justin Herbert propping him up. If they bring in another weapon, which you got to imagine that is a top priority for them this year, to bring in some other wide receiver to help him out.
T. Higgins.
Yeah, it would be so much fun. It would be him and Lad and Justin Herbert would be unbelievable amount of fun. But yeah, I think he showed this year that he's back, right? Because that last season, we were like, well, that sucked. Quarterback 17 finish after a quarterback 11 finish. But for me, I'm confident in Justin Herbert again. I don't know about you if you're still on the fence or if you're, I think he's firmly in this A tier.
No, I need to say this carefully because I was about to say, like, I see it similar to Mahomes. These guys, again, may not have the insane ceiling that we were seeing from them a couple of years ago, but there was a ceiling that they hit this year that was top 10 on a week, on any given week, right? And the hope for Herbert is, again, like you said, they bring in another weapon or two, that this offense is only going to get better for, let's be honest, an offense that we had very low expectations for just because it's Greg Roman calling the plays and it's J.K. Dobbins coming off another major injury and a 29-year-old Gus Edwards, right? Expectations were low, and not only did they exceed them, we now feel confident that they could continue to be or eventually get to a spot where you can say this offense is a top 10 offense in the league.
Yeah, and I really don't think we can understate the Jim Harbaugh effect, right? I mean, I think we underestimated how quickly he was going to turn the ship on this Chargers team, and obviously did it in one season. The final guy we're going to talk about in this tier, Jordan Love, we've just seen the upside, and he's a gunslinger, right? He's one of the few quarterbacks coming in that's just going to throw the rock. He's going to move it. The Christian Watson injury, I do think, is actually pretty significant, because he is the field stretcher. He's the guy that opens up everything else for this team. I actually watched Theo Ash on TikTok break down why he believed Christian Watson was the most important wide receiver for this team. And I got to say, it was pretty compelling. Just his ability to run block, his ability to he just opens up the field. But what I think we did learn about this Packers offense, and I needed to take this shot, is they don't have any wide receiver ones on their team. I was told maybe they have 4 wide receiver ones. Maybe they have 2 wide receiver 2s, and that's about it, right? That's where they're at. And they needed just another weapon that he can truly trust in every situation. I just don't think they have that. I think that's what was lacking. Obviously, he was dealing with some injuries all season long too. But we saw from Jordan Love, he's not afraid to just spin the ball, just chuck it down the field, make big plays. That's what you want in your quarterback. And then at 26 years old with Matt LaFleur, that's what keeps him in the A tier for me. I don't know if you're feeling the same or if you have any different thoughts on him.
Jordan Love, I think what made this year a little more, I'll say complicated for Jordan Love is the fact that they added Josh Jacobs to this offense and they rode Josh Jacobs like at an insane clip, right? So they didn't need Jordan Love to be the gunslinger that he was last year when they had Aaron Jones in the backfield. And that's not a slight to Aaron Jones by any means, but it's kind of the mentality that Green Bay now has of we're just going to go with what's working best for us, right?
Yep.
We're not going to rely solely on Jordan Love, even though we know he's capable of doing it. We don't have a reason to always go to Jordan Love. With Josh Jacobs in that offense, I think we're going to continue to see years like we saw this past year where there will be some good weeks for Jordan Love. Absolutely. But in games where Josh Jacobs is set to dominate, Jordan Love kind of lacks that kind of top 5 upside that we were kind of hoping that we would see this year.
For sure. All right. Before we get into our B and C tier, our last, what would that be? 16 quarterbacks we're going to hear from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
We are back, and we got the B tier quarterbacks. We got 7 of them for you. Kyler Murray, Caleb Williams, CJ Stroud, Brock Purdy, Drake Maye, Bo Nix, and Jared Goff. And let's be honest, this time next season, we could be talking about all of these guys in the A tier, probably with the exception of Jared Goff. I think he's probably the only one that can't take that step up, and that's just because he's an older quarterback who doesn't really run the ball. Right. I think that's really his only reason. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But we got, the more mobile quarterback, Kyler Murray. It was a little disappointing of a season, to say the least. He was a guy we were very in on, a guy we were like, hey, he's never going to score lower than 18 fantasy points, which he did. He averaged 18.1 this season. But you were hoping that it wasn't a floor year for Kyler. Only 21 passing touchdowns, 3,800 yards. 572 rushing yards, and 5 touchdowns. What is the outlook for Kyler? Is this going to get better? Is this what we should expect moving forward? Or do we think that, what really is the outlook moving forward for Kyler?
I feel like saying I'm worried about Kyler is a bit of an overstatement, is too extreme. But I think what we realized this year with Arizona, especially because we gave him the top tier wide receiver in Marvin Harrison Jr., right?
Yep.
This offense is very, again, structured isn't the right word to use, but it's very, like, the guardrails are noticeable in this offense where Kyler is told to really stay in the pocket. There's nothing designed for him with his legs. And these concepts that they're having their wide receivers run, not the most QB friendly. I'll just say it like that. Like, this offense, maybe the best way to say it is this offense is more vanilla than we were hoping it was going to be going into the year. So you have to respect Kyler because he does have the most rushing upside of any of the quarterbacks in this tier. He has the most legitimate argument to probably go into the A tier. But again, with the offense that he's in Arizona, again, we were kind of hoping that Kyler Murray could be the playmaker, can be the guy to really make this offense go. And that's just not how this offense is going to operate moving forward. So Kyler's a frustrating one. I think that's the simplest way to put it.
Yeah, it really, really is. Cause it just feels like You got McBride. You got, James Conner was playing well. You got Marvin Harrison. You got the rushing upside. What more do we need? And it just was disappointing again. Like I said earlier, could easily be in the A tier if we see a bounce back. It's just been a couple of years since we've seen high-end Kyler Murray fantasy, production. Another guy with a disappointing year. I'm going to skip over Caleb. We'll have the rookie conversation after we talk about Caleb and Brock Purdy. But CJ Stroud, right? He was overdrafted, and we talked about that at length. Of guys that he has to have, like we said, Joe Burrow-esque numbers from this year to return on ADP, and he just did not. It was really a disappointing year. I mean, he was in our biggest bust conversation, only 13.7 fantasy points per game. Disgusting. Players this season with more fantasy points per game. You ready for this? He had the same amount as Kirk. He had less than Matthew Stafford. He had a point less per game than Bryce Young, less than Anthony Richardson, less than Derek Carr, less than Trevor Lawrence, less than Daniel Jones. Disgusting, right? Not a good year. So what is keeping him in the B tier, Ty? It was awful. So why are we still holding on to this hope that he can bounce back, next season?
Because he has Nico Collins. Really, that's why. I mean, I do wonder if this offense got a little too crowded, you could say, with Tank Dell and Diggs and Joe Mixon and and Nico Collins. I think the other big part of this too is that this Houston offensive line was crap this year. Because what made CJ Stroud such a intriguing, player going into this year was the ability for Stroud to find Nico Collins downfield. Those did not happen as often this year. So I think, like you said, there's hope for some bounce back, that this Houston offense, utilizes the downfield game more often. But I think if I can just maybe give the answer as to why we think CJ Stroud struggled this year, it's because they had Joe Mixon. Mm-hmm. Right? They were able to rely on their run game, similar to how Green Bay was able to rely on Josh Jacobs. Houston relied on Joe Mixon like no tomorrow, right? So maybe the hope is that they become a little more balanced on offense, that the offensive line, protects CJ Stroud a little bit better next year, because that they've got the weapons. It's just a matter of, are they going to put the ball in CJ Stroud's hands because of some, and trust the offensive line to give him some time to deliver the ball.
Yeah, and you just look at his comparison from year 1 to year 2. 400 less passing yards, 3 less touchdowns, 7 more interceptions, 3 less rushing touchdowns. You add all those things together, makes sense they had a disappointing season. I still think CJ Stroud's a good quarterback. And I think that's what keeps him up here. Is I still think he has the talent to put it together. I don't think he's going to have 3,700 passing yards and 20 passing touchdowns again next season. Another player disappointed this year, Brock Purdy. We coming off a quarterback 6 season. Everyone was super high right on him. Christian McCaffrey was going to be back. Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, the whole core. Offensive line was going to look good. And the 49ers just disappointed as a whole, right? It was gross from top to bottom. Is that what this was this year? And can we expect a bounce back from Brock Purdy? Or is this just kind of a return to the mean, return to what we think is going to be the average for Brock Purdy moving forward?
I mean, all things considered, the QB 12 in points per game on the year isn't, obviously, quarterback 6 to quarterback 12 is not ideal.
Yep.
But I don't think it's as drastic as some people will make it out to be, because the other part of this too is that first half of the year, this San Francisco offense was not the same offense that we know San Francisco to be, right? You had the whole Brandon Ayuk contract dispute, and you could tell that he was a bit rusty going into the year. Christian McCaffrey isn't healthy, right? So yes, for as good as Jordan Mason was, you lost the receiving threat that is Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield, right? And then Brandon Ayuk got hurt, right? I think if I had to choose a quarterback that I'm betting on the most to bounce back next year, is going to be Brock Purdy. Because I think going into the year, it was disaster already. Sure enough, this season played out like that. It was a disaster. I think everyone comes back healthy next year. San Francisco offense does bounce back to where, to the levels that we know them to produce at. So I think it's going to be very easy for people to say, yeah, we saw him regress to the mean this year. I just think that there were a lot of external factors that caused that, more so than Brock Purdy himself.
Yeah, I mean, from week 6 on, Brock Purdy averaged almost 20 fantasy points a game. Definitely looked more like himself, dealing with injuries. And in that time where he averaged almost 20 fantasy points a game, he had 2.2 against Buffalo and 5 against Rams. 2 just terrible games that tanked that points per game, yet was still very good for fantasy football. Let's talk about these rookies quick. Caleb Williams, Drake Maye, Bo Nix. Obviously, Caleb Williams, Bo Nix both played the whole season. Bo Nix looked the best this season out of all 3. Caleb Williams showed, he's got some good rushing upside, over 80 rush attempts. Bo Nix had actually more, 92 rush attempts. Drake Maye came on at the end of the season, had a couple pretty decent games. I would say definitely in the worst situation, probably out of the 3, at least offensive wise, which could change, being the 4th pick in the draft this year. But my question for you, Ty, is if we're looking at these guys, is there one of the 3 or all of the 3? Let's say I have Patrick Mahomes and I'm looking to tier down to one of these quarterbacks and pick up extra draft capital. Are you confident in any of these 3 guys to tier down to pick up, that they're going to, be close enough to Mahomes that I should pick up extra draft capital? Or you still have question marks on all 3 that you would hold on to Mahomes?
If I had to choose one, it'd probably be Bo Nix, just because Drake Maye is going into year 2 with a new coaching staff. That typically does not translate to immediate success in fantasy football. Same for Caleb Williams, except he's going to be on coordinator number 3, 4, right? 4. Yeah, 4. Yeah. So I think that there's still going to be some growing pains for Caleb and Drake Maye. Now, while I do think they still will have the higher ceiling from a longevity perspective compared to Bo Nix, I think Bo Nix, that ceiling is not as it's not super far away from the other guys, because I think that was our concern going into the year, was like, well, we don't think that much or that highly of Bo Nix. But what he showed this year is that Sean Payton has belief in him, that Sean Payton is willing to dial things up for Bo Nix to have success. So the ceiling may not be the same as a Drake Maye or Caleb Williams in the long term, but it is not that far away as we thought it could have been. So again, if I had to choose one, to be Bo Nix. But if you're in a rebuild, right, and you're nowhere near competing, definitely take the shot on a Caleb or Drake Maye, because you're already playing the long game.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. I think all these 3 guys should, if you're in a rebuild, especially, right, if you're not a competing team, all 3 of these guys should be targets. Because what we saw from all 3 is that the rushing upside is going to be good enough that as long as they continue to develop, we saw flashes from all 3, they could be A-tier quarterbacks. I mean, Bo Nix, for Pete's sake, from weeks 5 on, was averaging 21.4 fantasy points per game. He was a top 5 quarterback in points per game. Obviously, inflated a little, helps with, 33 points on 4 touchdowns at the end of the season. But Bo Nix had a very, very good season. Definitely someone that I think is worth investing in. Caleb Williams, we saw flashes from, if he can get some continuity. Drake Maye, we saw some really great games from. All 3, I think, are worth investing in. All 3 I would trade down from. If you got a team that's like, they're looking at Caleb and I don't know if I can trust him next year, and I got a Jared Goff, I would make that trade. I move laterally if you're in that rebuild. Speaking of Jared Goff, another great season from him under Ben Johnson. Put up 37 passing touchdowns on 4,600 yards, 12 picks. The question for Goff, how much does we're assuming Ben Johnson's leaving at this point, right? Rarely do people pass up 1 head coaching cycle. Rarely do they pass up 2. And I don't know if we've ever seen someone pass up 3 head coaching cycles where you're a top probably 3 candidate for every team on the market. How much does a Ben Johnson departure affect Jared Goff for next year?
It does. I mean, there's no other way around it, right? The way that Ben Johnson has kind of schemed up in the system that he uses in Detroit, there's going to be some, you're going to feel a bit of the drop off with no Ben Johnson. That being said, though, he still does have Amon-Ra St. Brown. He does have an emerging Jameson Williams. He still has a Sam Laporta. He still has a David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs run game, and one of the best offensive lines in the league. Mm-hmm. So, yes, the play caller in the system is going to change, and that it won't, the ceiling won't be the same for Jared Goff. But he's got talent around him that if they get the right coordinator in, Jared Goff can still be, top 15 quarterback on a year-to-year basis. Because the thing is, Jared Goff just needs to play point guard. That's what he has done very well in Ben Johnson's system. So you don't need to bring in another coordinator with all the exotic looks and all the trick plays and stuff. You need to bring in a guy that just has a very good system. And if you can do that, Jared Goff should still be a very, very fine piece in fantasy.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think, like you said, it has to affect something because Ben Johnson, the entire NFL right now looks at Ben Johnson as probably one of the best offensive minds, right? People are literally talking about him in a way that we've really only heard him talk about like McVay and Andy Reid, right? That's the conversations that they're having about him. So it's going to affect, but like you said, the weapons, the line is just so good there that even, an average offensive coordinator coming in, I don't think the drop-off is going to be severe enough where we're just burying Goff next year. Before we move on to tier C, though, Ty, I do want to ask, if you had to pick 3 guys from this tier that could move up to tier A and 1 guy that could move down to tier C, who would those 4 players overall be?
The 3 players that could move up, in my opinion, are Brock Purdy, CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray.
Okay.
And the one that can move down, unfortunately, is Drake Maye.
Really?
Just because from a weapon standpoint, he's got nobody, right? If you fail on another offensive coordinator for him, maybe the best way to say it is this: the floor on Drake Maye is the lowest of any of the quarterbacks in this B tier, but his ceiling is still up there. That's what keeps him in the B tier. But if things don't go right again this year for Drake Maye, he will likely find himself in the C tier next year.
Interesting. So my 3 that I really like to move up, Kyler, Caleb, Bo, are the 3 that I think can move up. And then the guy I think can move down is Jared Goff, if any, just because of the changes, the fact that he is a pocket passer. So a little difference of opinion. That's why they're in the B tier, though, right? Because all these guys really can move either direction, and it wouldn't be uber surprising, right? If CJ Stroud has another bad season, it'd be like, you'd be a little shocked, but it wouldn't be like, oh, that's, especially from a fantasy perspective. And so I think that can kind of go that way with all of them. And then we have our biggest tier now, the C tier. Our last, I think, 9 quarterbacks in here. If you look on the screen, it's a little crowded down there because these are really quarterbacks that we don't know what to do with. Anthony Richardson, Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence, Baker Mayfield, J.J. McCarthy, Sam Darnold, Bryce Young, Tua Tagovailoa, and Michael Penix. And I know probably the 2 that you don't want to hear us talk about in this tier, so we'll get them out of the way right away, is Dak Prescott and Baker Mayfield. Right? The older guys, been around a while, not exciting. Baker Mayfield this season, unbelievable from a fantasy perspective. I mean, fantasy points per game, we're a quarterback tied with Joe Burrow at quarterback 3 in fantasy points per game. 22.5. Did not think Baker had that in the wheelhouse, right? Did not think that was going to come from Baker. Dak Prescott, we've seen years like that in the past. So I guess the question is, what separates Jared Goff? And this was a discussion we had right before we came on, from Dak Prescott and Baker Mayfield, Ty.
I think between Jared Goff and Baker Mayfield, for Baker Mayfield, yes, you've got talent, right? You got Chris Godwin and Mike Evans to throw to. You got an emerging back in Bucky Irving. If Liam Cohen leaves, he instantly, I still see maybe the best way to say it is this. If Ben Johnson and Liam Cohen leaves and you just have to look at the offenses straight up, I still give an edge to Detroit's offense over Tampa Bay, right? Now, new coordinators come in, that can change. But when you just look at the offenses straight up, I lean Detroit's over Tampa Bay. Between Jared Goff and Dak Prescott, though, I think it's more so that I don't know what to think if Mike McCarthy comes back. I also don't know what to think of Dak Prescott's injury. I don't know what to think of that, right? And again, it's a hamstring, right? Hamstring or groin? What was it?
Yeah, I think it was a hammy.
So it's not like it's an elbow. It's not like it's an Achilles. But you're stuck with all Cowboys players outside of CeeDee Lamb. You're stuck in this kind of like purgatory of just like, I don't know how much better things can get in Dallas. So again, I still lean Jared Goff over Dak Prescott then, because at least I know what I can get with Detroit, in that there is still a top 5 ceiling with that offense, even if Ben Johnson leaves. Versus Dallas, it feels like they're kind of stuck in that middling kind of purgatory of just like, they're going to be good, but they're not going to be great.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree with that. I think, like, you look at Baker, he had 41 passing touchdowns this season. He had never had over 28 in a season. Mike Evans is only getting older. Chris Godwin's a free agent. Like you said, Liam Cohen could potentially leave. There's just so many variables that it feels like this truly is the outlier season. Career high in attempts, completions, touchdowns, yards, not interceptions, second highest interception, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, right? Rarely do we see guys have career highs across the board that either do better or repeat, right? Usually there is some regression, especially when like your best wide receiver is going to be 32, your second best guy's coming off a season-ending injury, or he's leaving in free agency. I just don't see the same upside. And like you said with Dak, it's just there's just a lot of question marks. Yes, he has CeeDee Lamb, but that's really it in that offense. Let's then talk about kind of the not middle age. Well, that's not exactly what I was looking for. Non-rookie or second-year quarterbacks. So, guys, I'm talking about here: Trevor Lawrence, Sam Darnold, Tua Tagovailoa. We're going to talk about those three together. Ty, we're looking at them. Darnold, obviously, fantastic season. Is he, dependent on the system? Trevor Lawrence, disappointing again. Is it just time to give up on him? And then Tua, can he stay healthy? When he is healthy, what truly is the upside for Tua? So if you're looking at these three, can you order these three in terms of, if you're in a dynasty league, who do you like the most out of these? Like, what order would you rank these three?
Oh man,
gross question, I know.
Oh man, okay. I would probably go Tua, just because. I know, yes, you know what you get with Tua, but at least like he has Jalen Waddle, Mike McDaniel, Devon Achane, right? Like he's got playmakers, right?
Yep.
Probably Trevor Lawrence next, just because I think you and I would both say that there is some hope in that Jacksonville gets the right coach, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe I don't feel that way anymore because you kept Trent Baalke.
God.
I don't understand that. No one understands it. Then Sam Darnold, just because, again, Sam Darnold, if he doesn't go back to Minnesota, you're not throwing to Justin Jefferson. You're not throwing to Jordan Addison. You don't have Kevin O'Connell as your play caller, right? That being said, if Darnold goes back to Minnesota, I think I would go Darnold to Trevor.
Yeah, I think I'm Trevor Darnold Tua is the way I'm going to do it. I don't know. I can't quit Trevor Lawrence. I think the addition of Brian Thomas is huge. But like you said, if they bring in, they're interviewing Robert Saleh right now. If they bring him in, nothing against him, but just like a defensive-minded coach that I don't think, and they don't get the offensive coordinator right, then I'm probably out. I think Sam Darnold, it just looks good, right? It's been good this year. It's been fun this year. Tua, you kind of know what you're getting year after year as long as he's healthy. It's like 17 to 18 fantasy points a game, no rushing upside. You're hoping for touchdowns. They probably going to lose Tyreek Hill this year, would be interesting. All three of these guys really do feel like, though, they're going to remain in the C tier next year. Right. The upside is capped for these three. I think Trevor Lawrence probably has the most upside out of them. But I think him and Darnold both have the lowest downside as well. I think him and Darnold could be, hey, we're not starting in the next 2 or 3 years, right? And it's pretty ugly. So I think that's the same for them. And now let's discuss probably the more fun. This is what people want to see. This is what people want to talk about the C tier. We'll take a little more time on these guys. Because there really is a lot of trajectory. The trajectory of these guys' careers is, yes, we're projecting the trajectory of these guys' careers. There's a lot of outcomes that can happen. I'm just getting tongue-tied at this point. But Anthony Richardson, JJ McCarthy, Bryce Young, and Michael Penix. And I mean, let's be honest. We were not expecting Anthony Richardson to be in this tier. We were expecting him to be much higher in the B, maybe even the A tier at the beginning of the season. We were not expecting Bryce Young to take that step, especially halfway through this year. It was kind of like, oh, Bryce Young's done, right? We're never going to see him again. Then all of a sudden he just ends the year on a heater. Michael Penix showed enough in a good enough offense. Same, him and JJ McCarthy, I feel like, are very similar, but we have at least gotten a taste of Michael Penix. So in turn, let's discuss Anthony Richardson, Ty, because I know this one pains you, and it makes me happy to see you pained by this discussion. Anthony Richardson this season, Andy Holloway retweeted this. I don't remember who tweeted it first, but had the same amount of red zone pass attempts this year as Marcus Mariota. He had the same amount of red zone touchdown passes as Marcus Mariota. Marcus Mariota did not start a game this season. So that should tell you kind of how the season went for Anthony Richardson. Ty, is there hope for Anthony Richardson? Or are you just out? Are you off the bandwagon and you just can't do it anymore?
He is the perfect guy to go target if you have like a Jared Goff or a Baker Mayfield or a Dak Prescott, because you cannot rely on him in any kind of way. He feels like, maybe the best way to say it, he feels like how I felt about Bryce Young going into the year, where at least Bryce Young had like the new coach and you knew that the coach had a track record. Shane Steichen still has that track record, but you can't trust it you can't trust Richardson in any kind of way until you start to see something. Bryce Young, again, QB6 from week 12 on this year. So you can say that, Bryce Young has, he's starting to ascend. Richardson's right, putting the stock of Anthony Richardson to the side, right, of how people just view him as an NFL quarterback. There is more, I think maybe the best way, there was faith in Anthony Richardson. Now that faith is shifted now to Shane Steichen, that Shane Steichen will be able to get the most out of him. For whatever reason, it didn't happen this year. So there's a ton of question marks if it can happen next year, right? So that's why I say you need to, if you have him right now, I hope that you've got a notion that you can pivot to, because you cannot go into this next upcoming year with Anthony Richardson as your starting quarterback, because again, we know what the floor is like with Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, I will admit, I think unfortunately I'm at the point where I view him as Justin Fields in his last season in Chicago as the starter right now. He had a great stretch from week 11 to 16 from fantasy perspective, averaged 20 points per game. But from an NFL standpoint, he had 67 of 131, so 51% completion percentage, 356 yards, 4 tutties, and 5 picks with 5 rushing touchdowns. I don't have a lot of faith that he's going to be the starter in 2 years. Unfortunately, I think he's got great upside from fantasy while he's in. But I'm really hoping he turns it around. I'm really, really hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping, like you said, that the faith in Shane Steichen can kind of shine through. The next guy you brought up, Bryce Young, I think is a very interesting one, because the way he finished the season gives us some hope finally, right? I mean, he had in his last, since really the bye, 16.5 against Kansas City, 23.6 against Tampa, 13.5 against Philly, 14 against Dallas, 27 against Arizona, 17 against Tampa, then 36 points against Atlanta with 5 total touchdowns in that one. Is Bryce Young legit? Like, can you trust him as a quarter? Like, if you're sitting in a super flex right now and you're in this position, Ty, in our super flex league, you have Jalen Hurts and then Matthew Stafford and Bryce Young. Let's say you don't have Matthew Stafford on that team. Are you feeling okay going into this year with Bryce Young as just that second option? Or are you going, I need to get somebody else, I just don't quite trust it yet?
I am I'm more confident than not confident.
Okay.
But I don't feel secure enough in that because let's be honest. If he doesn't really have like anyone to like, ironic, you had a guy that to get open for him in Deontay Johnson, and then you traded him because you benched Bryce Young. Do I feel confident going into next year, relying on old man Adam Thielen, who may not even be on the team for all we know because he could be a cap casualty? Xavier Legette, who I did not understand being a first-round pick, undrafted free agent Jalen Coker, JT Sanders, rookie tight end this year. Like, again, I have confidence because I have more confidence than no confidence because at least we saw this year that he can turn it around, that Dave Canales is starting to kind of get the most out of him. But if he doesn't bring in another weapon that, isn't on the wrong side of 28, 30 even, like again, in the most ideal world, if he gets a T Higgins, like chef's kiss, we are fully on board then with Bryce Young. But if the best that we can do is like, I'm trying to think of a random receiver, like if the best that we can do is a Mike Williams, I'm not sure how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a little more dependent on what happens. If you're going to compete, I'm probably looking to add like Matthew Stafford. I think is a great guy to have. Right? He's not flashy from a fantasy perspective. He's not putting up a ton of points, but you can put him in every week and you're going to get 15 points. Bryce Young, we know there's the bottom. If he bottoms out, you throw in Stafford. If not, you know that you got a little bit of upside there with him instead. The next two guys, Michael Penix and JJ McCarthy, are tough, right? Penix, at least we saw. We got to see the glimpse at the end of the season. And I got to say, it gave me hope. If anything, it gave me a lot of hope in Drake London for next year.
Yes.
I'm going to be ridiculously, stupidly high on Drake London next year. I will admit, I'm going to be pushing him towards top 5 wide receivers next year. Like, that's how high I'm going to be on Drake London because of what I saw with Michael Penix. I already know. I'm just throwing that out there. But Michael Penix, are we going to trust him? Do we think that he could be moving up to that B tier by this time next year? Or have you not seen I don't think we've seen enough, to truly make this is who he's going to be in the NFL, right? 3 games at the end of the season. He did need to win those games and he played well, right? I mean, those were important games to get into the playoffs. He did have 3 picks, 3 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. But I guess the question then is, like, how do you value Penix moving into next year? Like, maybe the same conversation we just had about Bryce Young. If he's your second quarterback, are you in you're kind of compete, you're a competing team. Are you actively looking to go get somebody? Or are you going to try and trust him going into the season and then maybe make a move if he's not there? Like, where's your confidence level in Michael Penix for next year?
I mean, yeah, like you said, like he did show flashes. I think the thing that's going to limit, the thing that can limit Penix is I just don't think he has enough rushing upside to to push him into, higher tiers, right? There is a chance that there is enough passing volume that he kind of pushes his way into the end of the B tier. I don't think we see Penix go into that A or S tier by any means. So all things considered, back to what you had asked, I guess you could say, like, if you're looking for a young quarterback to invest in that you can probably feel feel confident in playing right away. Kind of back to what you had asked about Bryce Young. I think Michael Penix is probably the young quarterback that you can probably play right away and have more confidence in. I think I look longer term and see that Bryce Young can be a valuable piece in fantasy. So that's why I would still lean Bryce Young. But again, that's a pretty rebuilding mentality. If you're looking to win now with a young piece, you can probably take the chance on Michael Penix.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked Michael Penix coming out. I could not believe that they drafted him where they did. I could not believe that he went as high as he did in the draft. I thought he was going to be, later teens, 20s pick. He was the pick 8 by a team that just spent $100 million on a quarterback. So obviously a little bit different. But I do think he's good. And I think he's in a great situation. I think Darnell Mooney emerging, helps a lot. Unfortunately, I don't think Kyle Pitts is him, but I do think having Drake London and Bijan Robinson never hurt nobody. So I think those are pluses. And the final guy in this C tier is the hardest to rank because we truly know nothing about his future, and that's JJ McCarthy. We do not know if Sam Darnold is going to be back. There's been a lot of talk about the Vikings maybe trading him. I don't know about you. I don't think that happens. He feels like the handpicked guy. He's only 21. It feels like they're going to franchise tag Sam Darnold. If next season, something happens where Sam Darnold leads them to the Super Bowl or he does that this year, then maybe it's a little bit different. I don't know if that's necessarily in the cards. So he's hard because it does feel like he's not playing next year at this point. It feels like Sam Darnold would be back for one more year. But with JJ McCarthy, he is only 21 years old. So even if he sits 3 years, he'll be 24, which is where Michael Penix is now. It's just hard from a fantasy perspective to just have him sitting on your bench for that long, knowing he's not going to make an impact. So Ty, looking at JJ, right? We have him right in the middle of this tier. We know we've seen the upside. I think everyone can kind of acknowledge the upside is what Sam Darnold just did, maybe a little bit better, right? If Sam Darnold averaging almost 20 fantasy points a game, phenomenal quarterback. You have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, an offensive line that's getting better, Kevin O'Connell calling plays. When is it worth cutting bait on him? Like, what situation are you getting rid of him? What situation are you trying to trade for him in? I don't know. I really struggle on how to value JJ McCarthy.
I think it's fair to say that when he becomes a starter, we could see a consistent 8 to 12 finished year in, year out from JJ McCarthy, because I think he does have some athleticism to give you some sneaky 3-4 touchdowns a year kind of athleticism. So the you touched on it. The tough part with McCarthy is that you're just going to have to sit on it for probably at least another year, right? Mm-hmm. I would say the reason why we put him in this video as high as we did is because the window is much closer now to when he starts compared to last year, obviously. Mm-hmm. But again, I think when you consider the situation, you're throwing to Jefferson, Addison, TJ Hawkinson, got Kevin O'Connell. Why should you not be excited about JJ McCarthy in this offense? So again, like I said at the beginning, we're probably looking at a quarterback that is going to be consistently top 8 to 12. Mm-hmm. The discussion, I think, for JJ McCarthy is going to be, can he crack the A tier? Can he crack into that, upper echelon of fantasy quarterbacks? That's going to be, that's his ceiling. And so again, we know that that the timeline is close for him to start. What comes with JJ McCarthy. So to not have JJ McCarthy would be kind of malpractice, in my opinion.
Yeah. So the way I'm looking at McCarthy right now is, from everything I've heard, is a lot of people think if he was in this draft, he would be the quarterback 1 overall. Right? He'd be the best quarterback. And you're assuming he sits a year, he's going to be in the best situation out of any quarterback drafted. If you're looking for a quarterback in this year's draft, I would treat him like a rookie again. Mm-hmm. I would treat him like, okay, this next year's a wash. I'm not counting on him for anything. Next year, moving into next year, that's when I think I'm going to get JJ McCarthy, because they're either going to let Sam Darnold walk or they're going to sign him to a long-term contract and move McCarthy to another team. So I'm looking at him as a rookie again, which unfortunately, if you drafted him last year, stinks, right? Because then you're kind of getting that same thing. But I'm looking at him pretty much equivalent to the 101, or I haven't looked too much into where, maybe not the 101. I don't know where Sanders would go in maybe like 104 in a super flex league right now, right? But that's kind of wherever you take Sanders. I'm looking at him like a spot ahead in dynasty formats, assuming that this next year's a wash. Because even if Sanders and Cam Ward play, I'm not starting them anywhere, right? I'm not starting if they're playing for Vegas and the Giants. Yeah, no, thank you. I will not be. I might take them in a fantasy draft if they fall to me, but I'm not going to be starting them. So that's kind of how I'm viewing JJ McCarthy. But again, very difficult to figure out where he's at. Well, that is the top 24 quarterbacks for you today. Thank you for following along. We will have the top 30 or 36 running backs. I don't remember which one. Coming out on Thursday. From a dynasty perspective, next week we'll have wide receivers and tight ends. So if you love Dynasty Fantasy Football, make sure that you are subscribed. Make sure that you're following along, because we have content coming out for you all season long. We've talked about it all year. We are going to follow through on that. We are not going to stop. We are going to bring you nonstop fantasy football, especially if you love it as much as we do. Well, make sure you follow us on the socials. I put up our overlay that doesn't have our Twitter handles. Ty, what am I doing today?
Oh,
but I am at Camwell FFF on the X. Tyler's at Tyler_Plath. You can find us on X at fantasy or the FFLs. On Twitter at FFLs, Instagram at the FFLs. There it is. TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook, Fantasy Football Fellas. YouTube for our short form Fantasy Football Fellas shorts. So make sure you follow us on there. Make sure you're subscribed here. Make sure you leave us a review on the audio podcast. But we will see you on Thursday. Deuces.